Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture where we're going to be getting started with Django. We finally reached the moment we've been waiting for throughout the whole course, using our Python skills and all our front-end skills, along with the Django web framework. But before we actually dive into the technical details of Django, let's learn a little more about it and its really interesting background. Django is a free and open source web framework, and being a web framework, it really allows us to solve two major problems. It allows us to map a requested URL from a user to the code that's actually meant to handle it. And then it also allows us to create that requested HTML dynamically. So using templates, which we'll learn about later on, we can actually inject calculated values or information from the database into an HTML page to show to the user. So we're going to be really connecting all the front-end stuff to the back-end stuff through this web framework. And Django is extremely popular. It's used by many sites, including things such as Pinterest, PBS, Instagram, Bitbucket, Washington Times, Mozilla, and much more. You can check out the official Django website for a whole list of example websites that operate using Django's web framework. Django was created in 2003 when the web developers at the Lawrence Journal World newspaper started using Python for their development. And the fact that it originated at a newspaper is actually really important to the culture that surrounds Django. Because the original developers were surrounded by those newspaper writers, good written documentation is a key part of Django. And we're going to be exploring documentation as we go along through this part of the course. And that also means that you have excellent references to check out on the official Django documentation pages. Django has its own excellent basic tutorial where you're basically walk through creating a basic polling web application. And I would definitely suggest that you check out that polling tutorial later on throughout this course. And also the reason it's a poll is because that also extends back to its newspaper roots. If you're on a newspaper website, you may want to poll your readers to see whether or not they agree with the topic of a story. So when encountering Django tutorials, you're going to often read that you should use what's called a virtual environment, or you'll sometimes also see it as VENV. Let's talk about what a virtual environment is, how to use it, and why it's so important to use one whenever you're working with Django for a large project. A virtual environment allows you to have a virtual installation of Python and packages on your computer. So why would you ever actually want or need this? You've already installed Python, why bother with a virtual environment? Python packages change and get updated often, and there are changes that sometimes break backwards compatibility that your web application or web project may depend on. So what do you do if you want to test out the new features of a package update, but you also don't want to break your current web application? After all, you can't just take down your website every time a package gets updated. Well, that's where a virtual environment comes in. You can create a virtual environment that contains the newer version of the package, or a virtual environment for your older version of the package. And luckily, Anaconda makes this really easy for us. A virtual environment handler is already included. So to use this virtual environment with Conda, you're going to use the following commands. And we'll walk through this in just a little bit. But the conda create command initiates the virtual environment. So we say conda create space, dash, dash, name, and then another space, and you type in the name of your environment. So in this case, I've called my environment my env there. And then the last word there, Django, is going to say, well, what package do I want to initiate this environment with? And conda requires that. So you will say conda create dash dash name, the name of your virtual environment, and then the package that you want to start that environment with. And later on, you can specify a specific version for that package. So you can say Django, something like equals equals 1.9 or 1.8, 1.10, etc. And then you can activate that environment with activate space the name of the environment. And this all happens at the command line. Now, anything installed with pip or conda when this environment is activated will only really be installed for that environment. So that allows you to create separate versions of packages and Pythons all on one computer with the use of these virtual environments. And then you can deactivate the environment with deactivate my env or the name of the environment. And it's highly encouraged to use virtual environments for your projects to keep them self-contained and not run into issues when packages are updated. Alright, so let's jump to our command line and show you an example of actually creating a virtual environment. Okay, here I am at the Atom text editor, and before we get started by walking through a virtual environment using Conda, What I wanted to point out is that Conda itself has really good documentation on creating virtual environments or managing environments, and it's linked to in the resource notes, but let me jump to that website real quick over here and show you what it looks like. Just go to conda.io/doc/using/envs for environments.html, or just Google search Conda environments, should take you to this page, or just use the resource link. But this has a lot more details than what we're going to be showing here. Shows you how to create an environment, change an environment, clone an environment, remove, etc. So if you ever have any questions further than what we discuss here, you have this documentation that will walk you through all of these steps. So what we're going to be doing is creating an environment. And there's an example here, conda create --name. They're calling their environment snowflakes, and it uses BioPython. So let's actually create a virtual environment that will create a virtual environment for Django for us. So I will come back to Atom, click plus here to open up my terminal. And then what I will do is say this, conda create --name. And let's call this my Django env, and then I will type Django because that's the package I want to initiate my Django env or environment with. I will hit enter, and what it's going to do is download that Django package if I don't have it already, and then apply it to that virtual environment. And Conda is actually pretty smart, and it will know that if you have already a similar version of Django somewhere installed on your computer, it may not need to copy it, it'll just reference it. That way you don't need to download anything, it'll just reference previous installations. I don't have Django on this computer yet, so what it will do is fetch that metadata, and let me expand this to show you what happens, and it will ask you, hey, these new packages are going to be installed, is that okay with you? And I will say no right now because I actually don't want Python 2.7, I want Python 3. So what I'm going to do is say no on proceed, and instead I will say this, conda create name, and let's say my Django env, and instead of starting it with Django, I'm going to start it with Python 3. And the reason I'm doing this is to show you an example of specifying a specific version of Python or a package. So it's a very similar process. You say conda create --name, the name of your actual environment. And in this case, instead of a package, I will say Python, and then you say equals, and then you type in the version number you want. So for instance, I want Python 3.5. I'm going to hit enter. It will fetch that package metadata again. It will show me the new packages that will be installed. Here, I can see that I have the correct version of Python I want, 3.5. You can also do 3.6 depending on when you're actually viewing this course, if that's been added to Conda. But let's stick with something 3.4 or above. So 3.4, 3.5, 3.6, those should all work fine for what we're going to be doing. I'm going to proceed on that, select Y, and then I will jump forward in time for this to all be downloaded and installed. I'll see you there. Alright, so that has finished installing, and now we actually get the instructions. So to activate this environment, we can use activate, and then the name of the environment, and then to deactivate it, once we're done using it, we can say deactivate, and that will deactivate the environment. And if we ever want to use it again, we can easily just activate it with the activate command. And if you're on a Mac or Linux computer and you're using Bash, you'll probably have to use source, so keep that in mind. Alright, now that we've set up our actual environment, it's time to activate it. A quick note, in case you forget what environments you have on your computer, you can easily list them through this command, conda info --envs, and this will list out all the environments you have. Here I just have my default Anaconda, the root environment, and then this environment I created, my Django env. And depending on what Anaconda version you initially installed, this may say Anaconda 3 instead of Anaconda 2. But let's actually activate this environment. If you're on Linux or Mac OS and you're using Bash, you will probably have to say source, activate, and then the name of the environment, Django env. Since I'm on a Windows computer right now, I don't need to specify source. So let's bring that back down to just activate my Django env. I hit enter, and it will activate the environment. And the way I can tell that the environment is activated is you should see here in parentheses my Django env. And that means that everything I do right now in regards to Python is going to only take effect on this environment. Which means if I decide to install Django in this environment, it's only going to be installed that specific version of Django for this virtual environment. In fact, let's do that now. I will say conda install Django, hit enter, and this will install the latest version of Django. And for this course, basically any version of Django that's higher than 1.8 should work just fine. So 1.8, 1.9, or at the time of this course, 1.10 should be fine. Let's say proceed Y, but I do encourage you to at least use 1.10. That way everything we do in this course matches up exactly with what's on your computer. Okay, I'm going to hop forward in time for this to finish installing and downloading. Alright, so that finished installing Django to this virtual environment. And if I want to confirm if this virtual environment is actually working correctly, I can just type in Python into this command line, and I notice that the version of Python here matches the version of the environment. If I were to say quit and then deactivate this environment, so if I just say deactivate, notice I'm no longer in the virtual environment, so if I say Python now, I'm back to my original installation of Python, which happened to be this 2.7 version. So that's a nice little confirmation that you're in the virtual environment and you're actually doing effects on that environment. Let's say quit, and we're ready to go. Okay, so we did a lot of housekeeping stuff in this lecture, haven't actually dived into Django, but a lot of this stuff is really important and it's going to clear you of headaches later on if you don't learn how to actually use virtual environments correctly. So by this lecture, you should have a full understanding of virtual environments, at least how to create them, activate them, and deactivate them. You can always reference that link in the resources if you want more information about the environments, and you should have installed Django to your virtual environment. Coming up next, we're actually going to get started with using Django. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you in the next lecture.